All right, we're picking up where we left off last time together in Judges chapter 7. And when we left off, Gideon was spying out the Midianite army. And, just to give you some numbers here, Gideon's army, again, was an army of 300, and he was up against 135,000 men, which we'll see here in a moment. And looking at that, where we found ourselves, where we left off was with Gideon spying out the Midianites. He was outside of this tent and he was hearing this conversation about this dream, and then he was hearing this interpretation of the dream as well. And in the interpretation of the dream in verse 14, the companion had said, "This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. And to his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp." And Gideon heard it and he worshiped. So we looked at that response last time together, just how cool that is, just to have that immediate response. And then he organized, it says, organized his men, the 300 men, into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet into every man's hand with empty pitchers with these torches inside, right, to hide the light. And he said to them, "Look at me and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, 'The sword of the Lord and of Gideon.'" And so that's what they did. So they were at the outpost of the camp, and at the beginning of the middle watch, the trumpets were blown. Then the were ordered to be blown. The 3 companies blew the trumpets, broke the pitchers, and now all of a sudden, hear all these torches. And it says in verse 22, "When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. The army fled to Beth Acacia toward Zererah, as far as the border of Abel Meolah by Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites." So now other tribes are involved now in chasing the Midianites. And what I want to point out here is in verse 22, when the 300 blows the trumpets, the Lord sets every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. Looking forward into verse 10 of chapter 8, it said, "Now Zebah and Zalmunna were at Karkar, and their armies were with them about 15,000, and all who were left of all the army of the people of the east." So with this 15,000, this is just kind of me trying to piece it together here. 120,000. So I added together, you have 120,000 plus 15, you have 135,000. So basically, in this verse 22, with these men kind of fighting each other. So you can imagine in the middle of the night, all of a sudden there's this big ruckus, trumpets are being blown, and all you're seeing are these instantly just these torches all over the place, and the men shouting out, "The sword of the Lord and of Gideon." And so they're in such chaos, and they're so confused that they're literally killing each other just in this moment, to the extent of it gets the army down from 135,000 to 15,000 men. And so then that is would be who would be fleeing here in verses 22 and 23. And then also it says Gideon in verse 24 of chapter 7, Gideon sends messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan." And then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places. And it says also they captured the 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and which they killed at the winepress of Zeb. And then in chapter 8, the pursuit's continuing, and there's this neat interaction between Ephraim and the tribe of Ephraim and Gideon. And Ephraim says, "Why have you done this to us by not calling us when you went to fight with the Midianites?" And they reprimanded him sharply. So they wanted to be in battle, and so Gideon had followed the instructions of the Lord, had taken the number of the army down to 300. For what reason? So they would not get the credit, right? So God would get the credit and the glory. But now here on the tail end of this, the tribe of Ephraim, they're upset. Hey, why didn't you include us into this? And just this diplomacy here of what he says to these guys. He says, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage Abiezer. Remember Abiezer were that was the ancestors of Gideon. So he's just saying, hey, you guys are gleaning the grapes. I mean, what has Gideon and his ancestors done in comparison to you guys? It says, God has delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison with you? Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. That soft spokenness, a soft tongue, moves away wrath. We see that in Proverbs later on. And then, so Gideon and his 300, they're in pursuit, and they go through Succoth, this area, and the men of Succoth, he's asking, please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. And the people of Succoth say, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand that we should give bread to your army? So in other words, they're not going to take a position. One, they're not going to give them the bread that they're asking for, number one. And then number two, it appears to me here that they're not even quite sure, who's going to be the victor. So they're not willing to take sides, and they're not even willing to support Gideon. And so Gideon says straight up, for this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. So then he leaves there and he goes up to Penuel. And then in Penuel, it says that they answered him as the men of Succoth had, and because he was basically speaking to them the same way, right? Asking them for bread for his men. And they had said the same thing, hey, not willing to take sides. And so he says to those guys, hey, when I come back in peace, I'm going to tear down this tower. That's a big deal, because back in these times, that the tower, we're not sure exactly what kind of tower it was, but towers were key things that would even be built by citizens as a place to flee, if being attacked. This was a place of protection. So to tear this down in a city would be much like tearing down the water tower, that supplies the city, or destroying a reservoir, or maybe a capitol building, something like that. And then in verse 10, as we saw again here, this is where we get the numbers of the people in the army that are left. And then Gideon fulfills his word. He had told the men of Succoth and the men of Penuel, that he was going to come back and destroy them and tear down their tower. And then finishing up the chapter, that's exactly what he does. He comes back, tears down the tower, and fulfills on his word of what he said he would do. And then he does have the kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, and Gideon had actually tried to have Jether, his son, his firstborn, rise and kill the kings. They wouldn't do it, or his son wouldn't do it. And Zebah and Zalmunna speak directly to Gideon, hey, rise yourself and kill us, for as a man is, so is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took the crescent ornaments that were on their camels' necks. And then in verse 22 it says, the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, and your grandson also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. So he refuses kingship right here in this moment, and refuses kingship, but yet right on the heels of this, and gives all the glory to God. But then right on the heels of this, he's having the people gather together the earrings from the plunder. And so with these earrings, he makes this ephod. We see in this ephod, remember, is from the priesthood. We saw the ephod with Aaron and the priest with the Levites. So he's refusing kingship, but yet now he's kind of wanting this priesthood, because he puts this ephod together. And then it says, then Gideon in verse 27 made it into an ephod, these earrings, and set it up in his city Ophrah. Check this out. And all Israel played the harlot with it there. It became a snare to Gideon and to his house. Playing the harlot, basically they made an idol of this ephod, that Gideon made. And then the death of Gideon, ending chapter 8. Gideon dies, and he's buried in the tomb of his father Joash. And it says in verse 33, so it was as soon as Gideon was dead that the children of Israel again played the harlot. We see this again, playing the harlot with the Baals, and made Baal-berith their god. So right after Gideon dies, again we see the idolatry. Just and again, it's a reminder, right? It's not just these guys that we're reading about. We are these guys. I mean, we can look at this from a practical application in our own life. What is it again that that we're looking to? What is our idol? I mean, it can be something as simple as entertainment. I mean, just always having to seek entertainment, or money, right? So what is it in your life? What is it that has me play the harlot? And then in chapter 9, well, let's actually, I want to read just finish up chapter 8, verse 34. So the children of Israel playing the harlot, and then it says, thus the children of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, again, which is Gideon, in accordance with the good he had done for Israel. And then in chapter 9, we get into Abimelech, and Abimelech is Gideon's son. And so here Abimelech is going up to Shechem, to his mother's brothers, and he's basically speaking to the men of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal reign over you, or that one reign over you? Remember that I am your flesh and bone, he's telling them. So there were these many sons of Gideon, and now Abimelech is speaking to the men of Shechem and to these brothers and saying, hey, I'm of your flesh. How is it that the people can be ruled by 70 people? There's going to have to be one of us, and he's putting himself in this position. Basically, Abimelech really is a usurper, and we'll see that as we move along here. But he's putting himself in this position of being the one. And so in verse 3, the brothers are really reasoning among themselves, and it says their heart was inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. And so they gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went into his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he hid himself. And all the men of Shechem gathered together, all of Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king beside the terebinth tree at the pillar that was in Shechem. So kills his brothers. And what's interesting here in verse 4, these 70 shekels were given to these 70 shekels were given to Abimelech from his brothers from the temple of Baal-berith. So this is idol money, right? So this is money from idols. It's given to Abimelech, and then the same money he uses to hire these guys, these worthless and reckless men, and come back and kill all the brothers. And then in verse 7, Jotham, the youngest, the one son that survived, goes on top of Mount Gerizim. And remember, he had Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, and there was this valley. And it was in this valley that you could stand and have an audience of people. And Mount Gerizim was the mount where the blessings were that we saw in past studies, and Mount Ebal would be the curses. So on top of Mount Gerizim, Jotham is speaking to the people, and what he's sharing is he's sharing really a parable, and he's putting it in terms of trees. And so it says, when Jotham heard of Abimelech's coronation, he hurried to the top of Mount Gerizim at a time when the people were gathered in the valley below. From that vantage point, his voice could be heard across the valley, and the people listened intently to the strange parable he related. Using the figure of a republic of trees electing a king, he pictured Israel's conduct. He spoke of Gideon and his sons as the olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine, who wisely refused to leave their God-appointed places of usefulness in order to go and reign over the trees. But he likened Abimelech to a bramble, who not only eagerly accepted the invitation, but warned that he would destroy the cedars of Lebanon if the trees did not elect him king. That's verses 7 through 15. And we will be together again and finish up our this tomorrow. God bless.